My name is Vanessa Hayes. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to paint this landscape using Schmincke Naturals line of watercolor paint. I purchased a set of 5 tubes. The colors in this set are Curcuma, Madder Lake, Stil de Grain, Dyers Green and Indigofera. I will give you my impression at the end of the video. Here is a swatch of the colors. I have taped off a border and sketched out 2 areas of land stretching out into a lake with a hill in the background and a grassy area in the foreground. With my 1/2-inch flat brush from Creative Mark in the Mimic line, I'm wetting the sky area down towards the water line. I'm working around the trees and painting over the hill in the background to create a blurred atmospheric background. Then I'm painting in Helio Cerulean at the top of the sky. This is the only color I'm using that's not part of the Naturals line. I love the Schmincke Cerulean blue because it's such a beautiful bright color. And now I'm adding in some curcuma over the top of the trees and at the top of the distant hill. I'm leaving a white space between the yellow and the blue because we don't want a green sky. And in that white space, I've added some Madder Lake, and I'm dotting in around to create some soft pink clouds. The paper is still very wet, so the colors are diffusing nicely. I'm dragging the paint from the sky into the trees to prevent any harsh lines. I learned from a wonderful artist that you only want one hard line, and it should always be your darkest value. In this case, it will be the trees. I am using a very watered down Indigofera for the distant hill while the sky is still wet. This will create a blurry effect to show the hill in the distance and create soft lines. I'm also blending this out into the trees. Now I'm picking up Dyers Green wet on wet, so the 2 colors will blend. I'm smoothing out into the trees so there's no hard lines. I'm letting the colors fade as I get closer to the water line. I have mixed curcuma and cerulean for the foreground grasses, and I'm still using my 1/2-inch flat brush. I'm adding a little Dyers Green, trying to get some subtle texture. And now we'll let it dry. I decided for a little interest in texture, I'm going to add some splatter of Madder Lake in the left corner. I'm using my number 6 round. I covered up most of the surrounding area with paper towel to prevent the splatter from going everywhere on the painting. As you can see, I'm messy with my splatter. And now I need to clean up my mess. Using the number 4 round brush, I'm adding Stil de Grain to the trees in the middle ground. This is my lightest value. And I'm using lots of water. Next, I'm dropping in Cerulean and I'm blending it with the Stil de Grain to make a green. I'm having to work pretty hard to get the color I want from these paints. They are not good mixing colors. Now I'm dropping in plain water for some backwash. Now let's move to the trees on the left side. Again, I'm using Stil de Grain as my first layer and using lots of water to keep things moving. Then we will drop in Cerulean, wet on wet, and we'll let the colors blend. I'm moving it around to mix the two colors on the paper. And I'm using my brush to drop in clear water on the left side. This will create highlights and texture as it pushes the paint away. In order to create some depth and shadows in the trees, I'm using Indigofera while the paper is still very wet. I'm dropping in at the bottom of the trees and randomly where the shadows may be. This will let the colors blend with no hard edges. Because they're in the distance, we don't need any distinct details, only suggestions. This is giving us dimension and interest to our mid-ground trees. I'm adding a more concentration of darker tones to the edge of the painting to draw the eye towards the lighter center. And while the trees are drying, let's work on the water. I'm wetting this area, working around the foreground and the land masses I've drawn in the middle ground. Wetting this area will allow the paint to flow and blend easily. We're going for a reflection of the sky, so now I'm dropping in cerulean and I'm working across the foreground of the water. Then curcuma, and I'm leaving a space from the blue. And finally some madder lake. So we're picking up the colors of the sky. Sorry, but the light is washing out the colors. They are more vivid than what it's showing on the screen. I am adding a little more cerulean because the paint will dry significantly lighter. And now we let it dry. Using the Dyers Green, I'm painting in the peninsulas down to the waterline. And I'm taking this all the way up to the bottom of the trees. I'm finding this paint is very difficult to work with. It appears to have a lot of binders, and it almost has a gel consistency. I'm unable to get a smooth wash with any intensity of color. I have thinned the paint down for the land on the right of the page to see if I can get a smoother application. It does go on smoother with a thinner consistency, but still no intensity of color. Now we'll let that dry a bit before we move on. I have mixed Dyers Green and a little Indigofera to get a darker green for the grasses. I'm working my way around the right side, and I'm using my number 2 Mimic brush. The foreground is where you see the highest degree of detail, so I'm filling in quite a bit. I'm adding some grass and leaves to the left side where we put our red splatter. Also, I'm working around the top of the foreground to add texture and break up that hard line. And now I'm using my small palette knife to mark through the darker grass areas to create some highlights and texture. I decided the peninsula on the left was just too dark, and it was messing with the depth of the painting, as that landmass is farther back than the one on the right. I'm using a wet brush to lift out some of the paint, and I'm softening the edges. I think that looks much better. Fortunately, the Dyers Green lifts easily. I'm dragging some green into the water area for a reflection. And now I'm dampening the water below the peninsula on the right and adding some green on that side. And now we'll let it dry. I have mixed up all of my colors together to get a brown color, and I'm painting in at the waterline to create definition between the land and the water. And I'm using the number 2 brush. And doing the same on the left side. Pulling down some reflection. I'm dragging some of this brown color down into the water for reflection. And I'm running my brush horizontally to smooth that out. I'm using my number 6, and I'm adding a light wash of Indigofera to the water at the base of the distant hill to create the horizon line in the distance. Using the same brown that I used on the peninsulas at the waterline, I'm painting in some tree trunks. The trick to add depth and distance is to make some appear closer and some farther back by painting longer, wider trunks for the closer trees and some shorter, more narrow trunks to push them into the distance. That will create more depth to the trees. this is the number 2 brush. I'm adding a few branch details in some of these trees. I'm softening up some of the smaller trees in the distance. Felt like the color was just a little too strong. And a few more branch details. I've added a little more green to my brown mixture, and I'm painting in shadows under the trees. It's these little details that will make your painting look finished. And just a little more detail to the shoreline. And I'm adding Indigofera to the grasses in the foreground. I want to give some shadow to this area. It will also help the white marks from the palette knife look less harsh. Because the paint has dried lighter, I'm adding more Indigofera to the trees for a bit more shadow. Most of the concentration is at the base of the leaves. Now let's remove the tape and take a look at the painting with a nice clean border. Be very careful when removing the tape and tear away from your painting. decided the foreground should be a little warmer and brighter. So I'm painting over with Curcuma to add a bit more yellow to the grass in the foreground. And here is our finished painting. Here's the swatch I showed at the beginning of the video. The darkest value at the top of the swatch is tube consistency, and as you can see, there's not much difference in the values. I was able to get a smooth wash with Madder Lake, and the color is beautiful, but I can get a comparable color from their regular line of paints with better saturation of color and range of depth. To sum it up, these are interesting paints. I thought I would enjoy the fact that they're from natural organic materials, but I found them lacking in pigment and too much binder. It was hard to get any depth of color or value and left streaks and brush marks. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and are inspired to experiment with new materials or subject matter to grow as an artist. If you have not already, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe and give me a thumbs up. Please leave me a comment. I would love to hear from you. And I do thank you for watching. See you next time.